Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Leaders of the Coalition of the Willing are gathering in Paris to coordinate long-term military support for Ukraine, just days after the NATO summit and on the eve of France's Bastille Day celebrations. With President Volodymyr Zelensky and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte attending, the meeting will test Europe's ability to translate political commitments into concrete action. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss the significance of this summit is Romain Le Quiniou, Managing Director of Euro Créative. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
So this scheduled meeting is taking place just days after the NATO summit. What's being discussed there that it hasn't been talked about in NATO? Are we going to see any other concrete results and discussions, or mostly just more political statements?
I think this is more about continuation, political continuation, rather than new things. I mean, we know already that the Coalition of the Willing is in 15th summit. We should not expect something new, but we should expect a continuation, which means basically allies showing that what has been discussed in the G7 and then in the NATO summit in Ankara will continue. The allies will coordinate and will be able to deliver better.
Right, and speaking of deliver better, we see France, for example, long championing the idea of European strategic autonomy. Is Europe finally ready to turn that concept into reality, or is it still more an aspiration rather than actual capability?
Well, that's a good question. I think that France has been able to develop a bit more over the past few years the concept of European strategic autonomy, but especially the conflict in Ukraine, as well as the reorganization of the relations, I would say, within the allies and within NATO, has made the concept of European strategic autonomy something real, not something abstract and philosophical. So I think that on this point, yes, of course, I think that the allies are more and more on the same note here, that basically European should do more. This is also the concept of NATO 3.0 that has been developed, that has been at least discussed politically over the past few days and past few weeks. And what it means is that basically Europeans should take responsibility. Responsibility for what? First is to continue and reinforce the support for Ukraine, and second is about reinforcing strengthening, developing, even in some cases, European capabilities, because Europe is at war. Of course, now the war is on the territory of Ukraine, but Europe is at war in a confrontation with Russia, and there is no sign that it will stop in the next few months.
Right, and speaking of turning something from just abstract political statements to real capabilities, we saw in this NATO summit that a lot of talks revolve around industrial capacity and production capacity as well. We even saw Trump signing off on letting Kyiv produce a Patriot missile as well. Do you think that we'll also be seeing these sort of discussions on how to realize these industrial production in the coming summit?
Absolutely, I think this is key. And I think that, the Coalition of the Willing, what has been done correctly is that it's a platform for coordination between allies, between Europeans, between members of NATO, between allies of NATO from different parts of the world, including Asia or the Oceania. So I think that this is key, that we are better coordinated. I think that we can do more, we can do better, and especially that we need to find ways that allies should basically participate, should contribute with the best capacities they have. And now it's a time also to make better things with limited money. We know that some of the countries, especially the European countries, have not a limited budget, which means that we need to make some choices. We need to be rational, and it means that we basically, with the coalition of willing and different formats such as NATO or the G7 or small multilateral coalitions, minilateral also format, we need to do better, which means that allies should basically specialize on what they are the best and deliver. And once again, it's about delivering to Ukraine, but it's also about delivering to Europeans and to Europe, to make sure that basically the security of Ukraine and security of Europe is linked, is interlinked, and is mutually reinforced.
Right, so when looking at it from a coordination perspective, that makes a lot of sense. Now, one topic that has been kind of a logical through line through the G7 to NATO to now the coalition of Welling is the United States reducing its military support for Ukraine and European countries taking on a better role. And like I mentioned earlier, there's budgets to take care of, there's choices to make, and a rational decision needs to be taken. What are some of the capability gap that Europe is trying to fulfill with the US pulling back that might become a kind of a struggle where these sort of choices and decisions need to be made?
I think one of the critical capabilities that Ukraine needs, as well as European needs as soon as possible, is about air defense. At the moment, we know that the Ukrainian skies are not protected, which means that basically Russia is able to bomb both critical infrastructures, which is a big problem for Ukraine energy system, for example, as well as for the protection of the citizens, because Russia attacks citizens almost every night. So this is very important to have air defense for Ukraine, that's for sure. And this is a good way, or a good news rather, that the United States is open to deliver licenses for the production of Patriot systems. But at the same time, Europe also needs to refurbish these stocks and refurbish its capacities and develop new capabilities, basically, because the deterrence as we know it for the past few decades is over, which means that basically Europe, the European Union, member states and countries need to prepare for confrontation with Russia. I'm not saying that it will come, but it might come. And this is very important, that EU member states have the capabilities of supporting Ukraine at the same time of reinforcing their own capabilities when it comes to air defense, protection against ballistic missiles, and those different components, of the spectrum, basically starting from the low part of the spectrum, meaning interceptors when it comes to the drones, until the bigger spectrum, the higher spectrum, being able to protect against ballistic missiles, and also being able to shoot and to basically deter by the possibility of attack, which means that we need also to develop our capabilities when it comes to long strike missiles and ranges.
Right, there's actually a lot to take into consideration here when it comes to all these coordination. And again, perhaps this is one of the most crucial reasons why the coalition of the Welling needs to update with these meetings. Now, of course, one of the goals is to better coordinate military assistance. And has Europe become more effective at pulling these resources together and, again, on the coordination front to help be a supply to Ukraine or provide for its own need and avoid duplication? Or are there still kind of major weaknesses when it comes to how these countries go about coordinating who does what?
I think this is still a major problem for Europeans. And I mean, the coalition of the willing is one of the striking examples, I would say. Okay, this is a format that is quite interesting and is quite beneficial when it comes to the coordination between the allies, both at the political as well as the military level. But at the same time, this coalition of the willing is based on a very hypothetical supposition, which is that basically Europeans would ensure the security guarantees for Ukraine in the case of a ceasefire. So it's a very hypothetical format, right? There is no chance that at the moment Russia would come to the table and will agree on the ceasefire. And it's a bit the same for Europeans. We are basically trying to advance. We are basically trying to coordinate. There are budgets for defense reinforcement, for Ukraine support. But at the same time, the delivery is very slow, which means that the Europeans have been advancing, have been progressing, but at the same time, including and especially big EU member states, are not able to support Ukraine as much as they should. And at the same time, our development or redevelopment of defense industry is still very slow, which means that there is a window of opportunity for Russia to be in a direct confrontation with European Union member states in the next few years, meaning 2027, 2028, because Europe is still lagging behind. So I think that there is an urgency for European member states authorities, political elites, to understand that the threat is real and the action are needed now, and not just in declarations, but especially in delivering and in implementation.
Do you think that urgency is being felt now? We see countries like France, which traditionally looked at European security through a kind of different lens than many countries in Central and Eastern Europe. But has the war fundamentally changed Paris's understanding of the region?
I think yes, definitely. Paris has operated a pivot, which is basically now Paris is engaged and Paris is developing, supporting Eastern flank countries. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that the most serious countries are located on the Eastern flank because they are closer to the threat. And here I have to say that the countries that have been the most responsible and the most serious about the reinforcement of European security is the Nordic Baltic countries. The Nordic countries, of course, but also Baltic states, Poland, those countries have been and remain the most serious. And it's very needed that the most important European political leaders, meaning France, Germany, the UK, to some extent, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, they should do more. They should increase their support to Ukraine and they should drive forward the rearmament of Europe. Of course, this for Paris, there is the need also to understand the political limitation, the budget limitation. So this is why Paris has to develop more cooperation with key member states of the eastern flank. And here I am thinking about Poland, I'm thinking about Romania. Some progress has been done, but much more should be done.
And do you think this shift in understanding and the concept towards war is more reactionary? In other words, we see Europe investing very heavily in rearmament and defense cooperation. But do you think this actually is marking a change of a long-term strategic transformation? Or do you think this momentum would kind of fall off a little bit if the conflict kind of turns into a less intense phase, or if the war with Ukraine kind of dies down?
Well, I think in Europe, more or less everybody hoped to end the conflict. Of course, this is first because a war is a war and nobody wants to have a war in Europe. But there is also the feeling in most of the European Union countries that the war is very costly because of money, budget, and as I said, many EU member states, including France, have budgetary problems at the moment, but also because this is something that is affecting the political opinion, the pollings, and could also be detrimental when it comes to national elections. And I'm thinking here about very important national elections in the coming, in 2027. It's the case for France, it's the case for Italy, it's the case for Poland, and we can see the rise of extremist parties, anti-system parties, which have most of the time very contestable positions when it comes to the war to Russia. Some of them are pro-Russian parties, so there are problems there. But at the same time, I think that our leaders need to understand that this confrontation is here to stay, which means that the war in Ukraine might be temporarily stopped in the next few years, potentially. I don't think it will be the case in the next few weeks or in the next few months, but we need to understand that this confrontation is long-term. This is long-term because Russia is directly confronting us, but at the same time, at the international system, there are many tensions, and we can see the rise of China, which is a long-term challenge also we have to face.
Right, so there are still very much long-term threats to kind of prepare against as well. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.